The recent escalation of conflict between Hamas and Israel has brought the Palestinian question back to the center stage of Middle Eastern politics. If we look in the last couple of years, there were a series of attempts to bring peace to the Middle Eastern region, whether it is the Trump peace plan that recognizes undivided Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, or the Abraham peace accords between Israel and four Arab states, or even the Obama era Iranian nuclear deal. All this have either sidelined or undermined the Palestinian question of statehood.
If we look at the larger context, the first thing is the Abraham Accords that was signed between Israelis and the Arab countries. The second context is the absence of Trump in the White House, who was clearly pro-Israeli in his inclination. The third and the most important one is, I think, the Iranian nuclear deal, because, if we look at the context and recent conflict, Iran is clearly a tertiary actor in this conflict. The fourth and the fifth context are the indecisiveness around the elections in the Palestinian territories and in Israel.
The recent Israel-Hamas conflict has highlighted Hamas as a primary defender of the Palestinians and Jerusalem in the eyes of the Palestinian people, thus heaping more misery on the credibility of the beleaguered Palestinian Authority and President Mahmoud Abbas.
If we look at the repercussions of the recent conflict, it will clearly harden Israeli positions against the Iranian nuclear deal in its present form.
Here, both the sides claim their right on the same land and wants to establish their settlements. The city of Jerusalem is the focal point of the conflict.
The Arab-Israel relations are a bit turmoilous, complex and interesting happenings which mostly revolve around the issue of the Palestine in its core. Most of the Islamic nations do not recognize Israel. The most viable solution to the Palestinian problem was suggested by the Oslo process, which suggested that the most workable solution is the two-state solution.
The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken recognized this situation. In his recent visit to Israel, he showed some signs to strengthen the Palestinian Authority by opening the consulate at the East Jerusalem, or by saying the no talk with Hamas.
Recent developments show that more Arab nations are willing to engage with Israel after the UAE, Morocco, Bahrain and Sudan recognized Israel, and they also support for a solution to this conflict.
On the part of the Israelis, the conflict must trigger rethinking about their policies of building settlements, annexations and evictions of Palestinians in the occupied territories, as similar flashpoints are likely to lead to similar conflicts in the near future.
Before the ceasefire announcement in the region, we have seen that the international community requesting both the parties to the conflict to go back to status quo position. Now, what really is status quo in the region? For me, it is the asymmetrical power equation between Israel and Palestine. It is the blockade on Gaza, making it an open-air prison, and it is a series of illegal Israeli settlements in occupied Palestinian territories. If this status quo continues, then we are likely to see more such escalation of violence, more casualties of civilians and children, which will lead to ceasefire after certain days, and these will continue on loop for years to come.
Israel should stop its policy of settlement, because in a way it actually facilitates the cause of Hamas use of violence, because that is the pretext which Hamas uses, saying that and justifying itself, saying that it is a response to the policies adopted by the state of Israel.
The Israeli deterrence has clearly failed to meet its objective to create a sense of security among the Israeli citizens.
There are three things. Firstly, many member states of the UN have recognized Hamas as a terrorist organization, while others have referred to the military wing of Hamas as a terror organization. I think Israel should not negotiate or recognize Hamas for the simple reason Hamas uses violence and human shields. So it is a terror organization, and any negotiation with Hamas will actually legitimize its use of violence.
As you see, Hamas has emerged as a major player due to no major achievement of Palestinian authorities in recent years. I agree with this, that no talk with Hamas, because Hamas doesn't recognize Israel's right to exist. But in the meantime, we need to have some unofficial talk with Hamas so that Palestinian Authority can strengthen itself. And if Palestinian Authority is get its strength back, then Hamas influence will wane away.
US President committed towards two-state solution between two groups to end the violence and conflict.
Without addressing the Palestinian question, there is no peace to the region. The international community must seriously ponder upon a viable two-state solution that would bring an end to the long-standing conflict between Israel and Palestine and also bring peace to the Middle Eastern region.
I think the Palestinians themselves should have a self-reflection, and through more democratic procedure, they should come up with a representation which is more national and holistic at a national level, and that would allow more scope and facilitate, the peace process between Israel and the Palestinians themselves.
Negotiations are the only way forward, but with religious extremists gaining ground on both the sides, the prospect for negotiations looks very grim in the near future.
So if the international community is genuinely committed towards peace process in the region, I think it should change the status quo of the region first. It should hold Israel accountable for its illegal settlements in occupied Palestinian territories, not just through condemnation.
Hopefully, this will end this worst conflict, which has led to the death of more than 250 people altogether.